Well, it was an important night for the Ohio State Buckeyes on Tuesday night because for the first time here in 2022, we find out what the National Selection Committee thinks of Ohio State's resume and certainly their production. It's a number 2 ranking for the Buckeyes here to start the season. What does it mean? Are you happy with it? And what did you think of the rest of the rankings? We're going to get into all of that, plus a couple of thoughts on the part of Ohio State's schedule coming up here that, frankly, is very winnable as Ohio State prepares for November 26th in a few weeks against the Michigan Wolverines with some warm-up matches, I guess, between now and then. So we'll find out some thoughts on the rankings as well as some thoughts moving forward, how to handle these next couple weeks. It's coming up next on Buckeye Breakdown. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All-Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Buckeye Breakdown. Glad to have you. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Craig Hyson. We're doing a live show here on Wednesday morning as we get a chance to react to what we learned last night with Ohio State and Northwestern looming this week. The Buckeyes finally know that they know exactly where they stand in the eyes of the National Committee. The Buckeyes are number 2 in the country. We're going to dive into all of that here in just a moment. You can subscribe to the show. And let me say that again. You can support the show by subscribing. Obviously, I have the word subscribe on my mind. That's the best way to support us. We really appreciate it if you do that because we like to do content like this, and it helps support the show if you're able to subscribe. Hit the notification bell and join us. We've got a good audience already building here first couple minutes of being live. And at the same time, if you listen to this after the fact, wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts, that's fine too. But know that you can join us live if you'd like to. BuckeyesNow.com for all the latest. All right. So I have to be honest, I pretty much saw the Tennessee-Ohio State conversation shaking out the way that it did, although I guess if I were ranking the teams, I probably would have had them flipped. I'll give you my reason in a second. What did you think, Craig?
My initial reaction last night was that Ohio State I thought would come in at 3. I was just a little bit surprised they were at 2, and no fault to the Buckeyes. I just thought the SEC bias that we tend to see in these rankings was going to come through, and they want to build up a number 1 versus number 2 matchup this Saturday. That's the only reason I thought that.
Could be a number 1 versus a number 1 if you want to take the number 1 in the AP poll and the number 1 in the college football playoff.
Right. And it's so I was happy Ohio State was 2 when I saw it come across. I was a little bit surprised, like I said. I would have maybe had it a little bit different, and not that my opinion matters at all to the committee, but I would have had Georgia at 1, Tennessee at 2, Ohio State 3, and TCU at 4. If I'm a TCU fan, I'm pretty upset at this college football playoff ranking system, since they seem to be the team for a couple of years that have not gotten the benefit of the doubt, coming in at 7 at 8-0 with a couple really good wins that they have. If I'm a TCU fan today, I'm pretty upset. And we talk about, well, hey, it's the first initial rankings. Why does it matter? There's still a lot of football left to be played. But looking back at the history of it, 7 of the 8 number 1 teams have made it to the college football playoff, and 14 out of 16 in the top 2 have made it. So Ohio State has history certainly on their side, and there's obviously a lot of football to go, but things are looking good after the initial rankings.
I think that's a really interesting top 4 you would have had, and I'm glad we didn't talk about this ahead of time because mine certainly looks.
What was yours?
And the committee, and mine would have looked a little different than yours. I think the conversation between Ohio State and Tennessee is very close. And I guess we've learned what might be a little bit more important to the committee right now. But I think the Buckeyes' resume is better than Tennessee's. I'm certainly willing to concede that Tennessee has a better win. You beat Alabama. That's a really important win. Ohio State's best win is Penn State. And maybe that game looked a little closer at the final score because when the game was over late, they gave up a touchdown that really was irrelevant. But Ohio State also was in a real dogfight for 3 quarters before they turned it on and beat them. I know statistically that both offenses are achieving at a really high level. And so you're probably just nitpicking a little bit if you think about it that way. But Tennessee's defense is fine. They haven't shown to be great yet. They're very good. You don't beat Alabama unless your defense is good enough, but they won that game because of what they did offensively, not because of their defense. They carved up Alabama and they hung on. If I would have ranked these teams, I would have gone Ohio State, then Tennessee, then Georgia, and then Michigan. I guess I'm not surprised that the committee left Michigan out of the top 4 because their strength of schedule stinks. I mean, if you end up playing the 3 non-conference games that Michigan has played, you better look really good if you want to make the playoff. To their credit, they're undefeated. They did have a good win over Penn State. I didn't think Michigan looked quite as good against Michigan State, but still good enough to win the game, and their defense played fairly well. And Michigan's obviously in position to make the playoff because they've had a good season, and if they beat Ohio State, they're going to get in. Or if they beat Ohio State, they're going to go to the Big Ten championship game where they should play somebody that they'll beat, and then they'll get in. But I'm not as high on Clemson. I'm not surprised Georgia was ranked. I am happy to see that Georgia was not ranked ahead of Ohio State or Tennessee because I think they've looked good. I think they've also had, frankly, a game they were lucky to win against Missouri. And they kind of struggled for a good chunk of the game against Kent State. And I realize it's an entirely new defense, new personnel. It's going to take a little bit of time. They obviously have what is proving to be a great win over Oregon. I just haven't been as impressed with Georgia as I was when I looked at their defense last year. And like everybody else in college football, was hoping we were going to get a Georgia-Ohio State matchup so we could see the Buckeyes offense and the Bulldogs defense. I think Georgia belongs in the top 3, and I'm glad they came in at 3rd. But I personally, when I watch Michigan play, they don't have this incredible, explosive, skill position guys that are jumping off the page at you offense. They have what I think is probably the best offensive line in the country right now, and they're kicking people around at the line of scrimmage. They run it really well, and they've obviously got pretty good quarterback play. I don't know that they're going to go out if they played any of the 3 teams ranked in the top 3. I don't know that they would go out and score 35 points. They might, but I don't know if they would. But they tend to control the game pretty well. And I just think that the way they play at the line of scrimmage, for me, dictates a top 4 ranking for them. It's the only time I'm ever going to defend Michigan. But I totally understand the argument for TCU, man, because they got a great record. They have beat a bunch of ranked. I mean, they beat Oklahoma, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State 4 weeks in a row when all of those teams were ranked. At the time, I think Kansas was still unbeaten. They put it on Oklahoma. Oklahoma State, they beat in a top 10 matchup. And they beat Kansas State by 10 points when the Wildcats were 17th. West Virginia, I think, is still a pretty decent win. They're one big non-conference win. Colorado's having a tough year. And SMU is, I think, a pretty decent team, despite the fact they're not Power 5. I mean, what more is TCU supposed to do?
Right. They have the win over Kansas State, and then they beat them by 10, and then you see Kansas State go out and blow the doors off Oklahoma State last Saturday. So, yeah, TCU, like I said before, their fan base probably can't wait for this expanded playoff because they always seem to be the team on the cusp. But I was going to ask you, Brendan, what's one thing last night, whether it's something the committee said or a headline coming out of that show last night, or a team that you're like, whoa, they have them there? Did you have any of those thoughts after the show last night?
I guess I was a little surprised that USC was ranked in the top 10. I think there's a little too much hype around that team and maybe not quite enough result. Their offense is pretty good. I really don't think very highly of their defense. But we'll see. I also think LSU at number 10 made me really scratch my head as I'm kind of looking at the rankings here. I'll grant LSU the fact that they got off to a pretty lousy start and have certainly responded nicely. They've got a lot to prove, but as a 2-loss team, I think the door is still open for them to get into the playoff, which is kind of crazy, I guess. They lost to Florida State in their opener, and okay, fine. Their only other loss was to Tennessee, but they got completely annihilated in that. They've got Alabama this week. That's a huge game for LSU. Arkansas isn't ranked, but they're still a really good team. Even though all of Arkansas's losses have come in SEC play, then LSU should beat UAB, and then they close the year with Texas A&M, who is, obviously underachieving this year. They've only got one SEC win so far, but they're still a talented team. But if LSU finishes the season 10-2 and they beat Alabama, first of all, I got to look. Would that get them into the conference championship?
I'd have to look that up first. But yeah, like you were saying about LSU,
it would, because they beat Ole Miss. And if in order for them to finish the season 10-2, they got to win out, which means they would beat Alabama. So they would be the only team with one loss in the SEC West. So LSU could go to the conference championship game where they would see, either Georgia or Tennessee. LSU somehow could still make the college football playoff, which, no 2-loss team has made the playoff yet. I would not be a proponent of LSU to get in, but I guess if they beat Alabama and then they beat either Tennessee or Georgia, maybe.
Yeah, they'd have some good wins. That's the only thing that jumped off really last night to me. When I saw LSU at 10, I was like, whoa, we kind of know why. They're playing Alabama this weekend. They need to booster Alabama's resume, which seems to be when Alabama does lose, it's like the teams they play are typically inflated a little bit going down the stretch. But having them, they beat Auburn by, I think, 4, and Penn State blew the doors off Auburn. So it's like, and they had the bad loss to Florida State. I know it was Brian Kelly's first game, but they still lost. And then they had the good win against Ole Miss. That's the only thing. Seeing them at 10, I was a little surprised at that, but at the same time, not, considering who runs the playoff rankings.
So Tulane, had a chance really to become this year's Cincinnati, but losing to Southern Miss hurt them. So at 7-1, they're having a great year, but they're, with a loss, a non-Power 5 team isn't going to get in, so they're out. I guess I kind of got caught a little off guard by the ranking for Illinois at 16, because look, they're playing really good defense, and their play at the line of scrimmage has been really good. I don't know that you're going to get confused with Illinois' offense with some juggernaut, but I don't know. I just don't know where I would put them. What if, and it's not going to happen. I just don't believe it. But what if they run the table and make it to the Big Ten championship game and pull off some incredible upset? I guess they would deserve to be in the playoff, but that means they'd have to beat Michigan State, Purdue, Michigan, and Northwestern to run the table in the regular season. I could certainly see them winning those first 2 games, Michigan State and Purdue. I don't think they're going to beat Michigan. Although, certainly hope so, because that would help Ohio State's case. But I don't know. I just, the idea of seeing Illinois football ranked number 16 caught me off guard a bit.
It's been a while. The other thing, big weekend this weekend to see, obviously, whoever wins Georgia, Tennessee, if Georgia wins, they're going to go to 1. But the game I'm going to be watching, I think they play Saturday night, Clemson and Notre Dame. I mean,
Yep.
Clemson, I'm not even sure they're dead set on a quarterback from what I've been reading online about who's going to play Saturday. And if it's going to be interesting to see how that narrative changes. If Notre Dame were to knock off Clemson, they'll certainly go into the top 25, and then that turns into another quality win for Ohio State.
Well, so that's where I look at the rankings a bit, and I get, I don't know if confused is the right word, but like I'm wondering why the committee thinks higher of Clemson than it does TCU.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Clemson's resume is okay. Is it just brand bias? You know, they beat the ranked wins are Wake Forest, NC State, and Syracuse. And all of those have been relatively close games. They beat Wake Forest by 6 in a high scoring game. They beat NC State by 10, and NC State's a good team. And they beat Syracuse by 6 last weekend in what I thought was a pretty good game.
That was a good game.
But, you know, when you start thinking about TCU's got more ranked wins. I think TCU plays in a tougher conference this year. TCU's total offense is number 4 in the country. They are the number 4 passing efficient team in the country. TCU's defense is basically on par with where Tennessee's defense is, but they're ranked way below Tennessee because they didn't beat Alabama. I don't know. I just have a hard time wrestling with that and trying to figure out why this committee is so high on Clemson, because I think Clemson's good, but I don't know. I'm not overly if I'm playing in the ACC, I'm not wildly concerned about Clemson. I think they're beatable.
Yeah, it's Clemson. I've watched them on several occasions this year. Haven't been overly excited about their performances, especially I think at the Boston College game. Weren't they tied at halftime, like 3-3?
Yeah,
and
I just
they
pulled
ended
up
up blowing
Clemson.
the doors off of them.
I just pulled up Clemson's numbers here. Clemson on the season, they have the 49th ranked total offense. They're 41st in rushing, 71st in passing. They're 7th in rushing defense. They're 3rd in 4th down on offense. They have the 3rd best red zone offense. So, you know, they've got their top 10 in a couple of different categories, but they're basically a middle of the road passing offense. Their rushing offense is, I mean, it's 41st, so that's fine. But they're barely a top 50 offensive team in the country. I don't understand how that ranks better than TCU.
Yeah.
And the quality of their wins. TCU, I just think TCU's had better wins. I mean, they've got more ranked wins than Clemson does. Does the committee not think as highly of, you know, the ranked teams that they've put in the Big 12? They ranked them. I mean, I don't know.
You make a good point there. My only gripe kind of with the current system, and we can get into that in another show about the expanded playoff and what do we think it does to college football. But my only gripe is year to year, the criteria seem to change. Like this year, it's kind of sounds like more like eye test, because every time they talk about Ohio State, they talk about the 32 point average margin of victory. They really don't give them a ton of credit for their schedule, and that's a topic we can talk about another day. But really good win against Penn State. But then they talk about the teams that you played. That's kind of sounds like what they discounted Michigan on their non-conference schedule, and rightfully so. I know they had the game. I think they were supposed to play UCLA. That got switched, and they had to backfill that. So they would have had a good game in there, but they filled it with a horrible team. So it seems the criteria every year just kind of change depending on what teams are up there and what they want to pinpoint. So it's hard.
Let me ask you this. I don't even know if you know their record off the top of your head, but just purely from what you've seen from them, do you think Texas should be ranked?
If my only thing with Texas is Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt in that Alabama game, I think they win that game. I watched that game, and when he was in there, they were rolling pretty good. And Should they be ranked? I would say no. They're probably like 27, 28. They're 5-3, I think.
They're 5-3, and they're the only 3-loss team to be ranked. And maybe it's just the conspiracy theorist in me, but it screamed of like, oh, that's a ranked win for Alabama.
It's crazy how nothing really affects Alabama when they're undefeated. No one pokes holes in other teams' schedules, this and that. But as soon as Alabama loses one game, it's like, man, the stars align for them to play the rest of their schedule and get these teams ranked the highest they possibly can. That's why LSU at 10, I was like, come on. That's just to have them get a top 10 win this Saturday. So
I think the biggest takeaway here is that Ohio State, in my opinion, controls its own destiny to a top 2 spot, which I think is important. Based on who is already toward the top of the standings or rankings, I should say, and what's left ahead of Ohio State, they would have to play really subpar football any of these next 3 games for them to fall back. Mm-hmm. And if they can win every game up to Michigan, and then if you beat Michigan, that's a super high quality win. You're not going to regress in the rankings after beating Michigan. And right now it's looking like you potentially would play Illinois in a Big Ten championship game. If the committee thinks highly enough of Illinois to stick them at 16, and frankly, Illinois could earn some more respect if they play Michigan tight. I don't know. I am really not worried about Ohio State getting in the playoff, and frankly, I don't think anybody is. If this team does every week what we've seen them do so far, they're going to get in. That's not a problem. But I would like to think there's a path for the Buckeyes to be the number 1 team if they win out and continue to play the way they have, and that includes a win over Michigan. Because as I look at the other teams that are in the conversation for that top spot, Tennessee and Georgia, Tennessee's offense is very, very good. Their defense is okay. Georgia's defense is proving to largely be a very good defense, and their offense is pretty good. But I don't know that I would say either side is truly elite. And I say that because while Georgia's had some elite performances through 8 games, they've also had a couple performances that really make you scratch your head a little bit. They should not have struggled with Missouri the way they did, and they should not have struggled with Kent State the way they did. Ohio State has the number 6 rated total offense and number 6 rated total defense in the country, and they have completely smothered every team that they've played. So I feel like Ohio State is the most complete team, and I've said that before these rankings even came out. If the Buckeyes run the table, and that includes a win over Michigan, it would not surprise me if that pushes Ohio State to the top of the rankings.
I wouldn't be surprised either. And Brendan, that comment that just came in about Clemson and TCU, that was going to be my next question for you. Where do you think, after last night, the initial rankings, do you think there's a path for Ohio State and Michigan to both make the playoff?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the only loss for Ohio State and Michigan is the game. Obviously, that will hurt because it'll keep you out of a conference championship game. Mm-hmm. I am more inclined to say that it would be favorable to Ohio State than to Michigan, because thus far there's clearly a condemnation of Michigan's schedule. And even if Ohio State's non-conference schedule hasn't been quite as good as they thought it could be, mostly because Notre Dame hasn't been quite the team we thought they would be, there was an effort to schedule a good team, for one, and it's still a way better strength of schedule non-conference than what Michigan played with those 3, non-league games. Hang on one second. Excuse me.
It's looking at the. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to say I think Ohio State, if they played a really close game to Michigan and they continue to look elite against every other team in the country, I think there's still a conversation, especially considering the fact it's happened before, where they didn't even make the Big Ten championship game and still got in. And I think this team is better than that team was. So under that scenario where if Clemson and TCU both lose a game, I think Ohio State still has a shot if they lose to Michigan. If Michigan loses to Ohio State and that's their only loss, I would be a little bit skeptical that I would just give it to them. I would want to see what kind of loss Clemson and TCU suffered in that case, but I don't think it's a 0% chance that Michigan would still get in.
Yeah, you said it right there at the end. I agree with what you said there. It just depends what game they lose. You know, it's honestly I'm pulling big for Notre Dame Saturday night. I mean that they knock off Clemson, and if TCU goes down, I know they got some tough games coming up. I can't remember off the top of my head who they play Saturday, but it just depends what game they lose for Michigan. If they were to lose to Ohio State,
TCU has Texas Tech.
Okay.
At home, then they're at Texas, at Baylor, and at home against Iowa State. So their schedule's not super difficult. Texas Tech's 500 team. Obviously, we mentioned Texas is they're okay. They're at 5-3. Baylor's 5-3, and Iowa State is having a tough year. They're 3-5, and they have not won a conference game yet. So they're hanging their head on a win over Iowa.
Right. So it's just one of those things. It depends who they lose to. You know, as a Big Ten guy and Ohio State fan, I would love to see two Big Ten teams get in there, even though it is Michigan. You know, it's one of those things. We've seen it with the SEC. Michigan's a very good team. They're not as sexy as these other teams at the top on offense, and I think that's to their detriment. I think, you know, the committee always talks about these high-flying offenses in Ohio State and Tennessee, and Michigan just plays a different style of ball. And I think in this day and age, they don't really get the benefit of the doubt when they're not lighting up the scoreboard as much as other teams. So we'll see. There's a lot left to be played. I just thought, going back to our initial gut reaction from seeing it last night, the LSU at 10 is what jumped off the page to me. But like I said at the beginning, history's on our side with 14 out of 16 teams in the top two that have made the college football playoff. So obviously Ohio State wins out, they'll be in.
Buckeyes are number 2 behind Tennessee. Georgia's number 3, and the Clemson Tigers number 4 in the initial college football playoff rankings. But a bunch of undefeated teams and one-loss teams that are hot on their heels. We'll see how it all shakes out here with still a month left in the regular season. Thanks for joining us this morning. Appreciate that. Please subscribe to our channel. That would be really cool if you could support the show that way. And then hit the notification bell. We've had a good audience here this morning and a good comment section going. We certainly enjoy doing this for a live audience. If you're listening after the fact, wherever you like to find your favorite podcasts, that's cool too. Thank you. But know that you can join us live because we're live on our YouTube channel most of the time when we shoot these shows. And for all the latest news and info on the team, head over to BuckeyesNow.com. Getting ready for Ohio State and Northwestern on Saturday. We've got more coverage playing this week as we preview that game. But for now, for Craig Hyson, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for joining us on our first reaction show for the college football playoff.